This is Freedom Investor Radio, and I'm John Pearl. It hit me like a freight train when I realized there was a better way. When I discovered that I could take my future into my own hands. When I realized I could invest my way to freedom. This is what I'm working towards. In each episode of Freedom Investor Radio, we will explore the tactics and strategies used by the top real estate investors and entrepreneurs in the nation. We will learn how you can start investing your way to freedom and take control of your life. Thanks so much for tuning in. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Freedom Investor Radio. I'm your host, John Pearl, and today I'm joined by Damion Lupo. Damion, welcome to the show today.
John, it's good to see you again.
Yeah. All right, Damion. So what I like to do is just hand it over immediately. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do now, and how you got there.
So what I do now, what I did 20 years ago is a little different. And 20 years ago, I did everything right and wrong at the same time. And I'm somebody that doesn't like being told what to do. So I tend to go figure out a way to do things differently. That's what entrepreneurs do. And that started back 35 years ago when I started my first business when I was 11, hired my parents. And that was just because I wanted to play Nintendo games. And they told me we were broke. And I said, I don't buy it. So I went and bought Nintendo games and played them and sold them. And anyway, that was kind of the beginning of this whole thing. And then that juice, that blood that you have as an entrepreneur doesn't go away. Everywhere you look, you're looking at problems, trying to figure out a business model to go solve them. And so in the late 90s, like literally December 31st, 1999, I bought a house with my credit card. And that was what you do when you watch a seminar and you read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You're like, oh, I can solve this problem with Visa. So I did. And that led to 150 houses, bought a bunch of houses, made a bunch of money, became a multimillionaire in my 20s, bought the Ferrari, had this really cool, fun ride. And then 2008, I showed myself how stupid I was and how naive I was. And it was because I thought I was 10 feet tall and bulletproof, and I lost $25 million in 12 months. So that creates a very interesting experience called a reset. And so we hear about this great reset, the world reset, all this stuff. I had a great reset in 2008. And on the other side of that, I did a whole lot of deep diving after the first 2 years, which was called denial. It's that river, that you live in. And I spent some time there. And on the other side of that, I really started asking some different questions, like, is more better or is more just more? And what I realized, and my belief, is that more is simply more. It's better or worse. It depends. And so just going after money became less and less of an interest, to be going after more and more impact, because I believe purpose is based on purpose. Purpose is not to go get more money. Purpose is why you're here. And there's a lot of wealth that gets created from being on purpose. And so our job is to figure out how to get into a place of purpose pursuit as soon as possible. And part of that sometimes is getting the money out of the way. And so that's what I've spent a lot of the last decade doing, helping people get their focus on purpose and get the money stuff out of the way instead of it being the fear that drives them every day.
Got it. And so you also are heavily involved in something that's relatively new to me. I've heard about this, a couple of years ago. Didn't really learn too much about it until we met in Dallas last month. The eQRP. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the eQRP is an enhanced qualified retirement plan. It's something that I created a number of years ago. And basically what it does is it takes retirement money and allows you to have actual control of it. It's different than a thing like a self-directed IRA or a solo 401k. This actually gives you control. It protects you from being sued. It allows it gives you control, whether you're by yourself, whether you have 100 employees, everybody gets control. So it's a very unique thing. It's a one of a kind. It's the only kind in the country. And it's meant for people that say, I don't really trust Wall Street as much as I trust myself to make good decisions. I believe I'm going to love my money more than the advisor will that peels off 2 or 3% a year for doing nothing but playing golf. And so it gives the people the ability to take their IRAs and 401ks and buy real estate, buy Bitcoin, buy physical gold, instead of just being stuck in stocks. Like a diversified portfolio is not 5 mutual funds. It's different asset classes. As you know, being in the syndication world, there's something called a real asset, which is something that you can touch, that you can get your arms around. And unfortunately, people think real assets are stocks and bonds, and paper assets that are really made up and they're all derivatives of a company, but you have no control. So what you're doing is really cool because it allows people to invest in something that's tangible. And what's crazy is people can actually use their retirement account money and invest in things that are more predictable.
So what drove you to start the eQRP? What was it that you were seeing or you were experiencing that motivated you to get started with that?
I saw a lot of manipulation in the industry. I saw 401ks where people just basically default into them. The legislation in Congress is set up so that people they go wherever they're told to go, and they don't really ask questions. So people were putting money into their 401ks, and then they were basically stuck there until maybe one day they said, "Oh, look, a self-directed IRA. I can do something self-directed." And when I dug into those, what I found was that custodians were not doing a good job of coaching people. They were basically just doing compliance, and then people were getting killed with taxes. And specifically, what I noticed was people were getting taxed using their IRAs when they were buying real estate. So normally you think, well, if I have a tax shelter called a retirement account, I shouldn't be taxed until I pull the money out. And what was happening instead was people were buying real estate with their IRAs, and they were getting hit with UBIT tax, which is the unrelated business income tax, because of debt. We love debt in real estate. It's like the great leverage tool. But the problem is, if you use an IRA, you get taxed. And so when I dug in and spent over a year researching and writing a book with a tax attorney called the QRP book, I realized, wow, there's actually a completely different rule set in the 401 section. And that's where the eQRP is built. It's exempt from that tax, and you can actually take control. So I realized that people weren't being told what they could do. They were being told what the IRA companies wanted to sell them. And so when I started sharing that with people, they go, why in the world would anybody do anything else? And I said they wouldn't once they knew. And it's been really fun educating people, because it's like people have found a unicorn, like all of a sudden, like, well, what is this thing? So it's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got a copy of that book, the eQRP book, in Dallas when we met, and I read it on the way back here. I read a good amount of it, and I felt the same way. I'm like, why did I not know about this earlier? And is this real? And what is it? Why aren't more people doing this, or why haven't more people done this in the past?
People just don't know about it. There's over $10 trillion in the self-directed IRA space. So you've got all sorts of marketing money that's brainwashing people, big machines. It's kind of like when we think about money, what do we normally think about? Whatever the bobblehead on CNBC has said, what Jim Cramer is saying, what the Wall Street Journal says, what Yahoo News, where it's way mainstream because that's everywhere. It's all around us. And any type of journalism, it's kind of funny. Journalism, like, what is that? It's basically, it's a mouthpiece for the big industry that's paying for the advertising. Just like who pays for all the television commercials? It's political campaigns and pharma. And you can just see that with all the advertising. So the reason people don't know about this is because most people don't go to the places where they could see it. On your show here, if they're paying attention to what we call alt media, which is basically podcasting, you start learning about all the things that make rich people richer. If you're listening to mainstream stuff, you realize this is how people stay poor or get poorer. And it's because the system is feeding on everybody unless you go outside of the main street system or the Wall Street system. And that's what this is. It's people find out about this at seminars and their friends tell them. And usually the first question is what you just said. Well, how is this even real? And I always laugh. I'm like, of course you should ask that question because you've never heard of it before. And then once people realize it is real, they say, well, how fast can I do this? Because I wish I'd done it 10 years ago. And that's usually the process.
So who would benefit from participating in an eQRP, and what would the process be like? Say, so I'm in the W-2 world. I also know many small business owners. How does someone like that get involved, and what does it look like for them?
So people do it a couple of different ways. One way, they have some self-employment income and they start they want to shield that from all the taxes that are out there, all the federal and state taxes. So they'll use an eQRP, they set it up and they start contributing. That's one way. People that have old IRAs or 401ks from a previous employer can take that money and roll it in and now have actual control of that with the checkbook. Sometimes people do both of those. Small businesses, oftentimes to be competitive, it makes sense to set up a 401k, but you're going, oh man, I don't want my money to be stuck in Wall Street. So this gives the small business owners, and when I say small, you could literally have 500 employees and this will work and everybody gets control. Most employees will go straight to stocks and bonds, which are included, but it gives everybody the option, and that's the power. It also generally will save the average small business that has 50 employees about $50,000 a year. So that's just for business owners listening. You think about that. That 50,000 is straight into your your jeans at the end of the year. That's just straight profit that would have gone away that you're saving in fees that Wall Street can't rip out of your shorts. So the people that this is good for are the people that want to invest in things like real estate, crypto, gold, private equity. It's not really going to be super valuable for somebody that says, I just like stocks. Like this doesn't really do anything for them.
Right. And so you mentioned checkbook control, and that's a relatively new concept for me, but I believe it is. So if in a standard 401k, you have very limited options. You can put it into these I forget what they're called, but a target date fund, I think, something like that, where yeah, and you don't really have that much control over what it is. There's just a couple options, but with something like checkbook control, you can actually choose the exact asset that you invest the money in. And if I understand correctly, it can be hard assets, physical gold, actual Bitcoin, not some derivative of Bitcoin. Am I understanding that correctly?
You have the control and the choice. Yeah. The default is that it's stocks and bonds. And why? Because somebody else can hold them and they can fee you to death. So this gives you the ability to do that. Checkbook control used to be a term that was associated with IRAs. In November of 2021, just 6 months ago, the US tax court ruled that those are illegal, that they cannot be used because the entire setup around IRAs was meant to have a custodian, somebody that would oversee and basically have command of the assets. They're the ones that everything had to go through them. And so the tax court said, you guys have been abusing this. What you're doing is not what we had in mind. And so we're going to default your account and distribute it, which basically mean the people that were in the middle of this court case had their assets distributed, taxed, penalized, and it made checkbook